with some of the cast members earlier, just going over some of this stuff. Um, Charles said we have until 3 o'clock, which is a pretty good chunk of time. I would be delighted to do whatever would be interesting to you folks. Okay, we can do some Q&A. I can tell a little bit about my background, how I got involved. We can learn some phrases, whatever. Before that, tell me a little bit about you folks. You're all Disney fans, I understand.
Yes.
All right, I'll start.
Okay, thank you.
Big Disney fan, big Avatar fan.
Great,
A little
great.
nerdy with this stuff, with the Avatar language.
Okay.
I run a website called bigfatpanda.com, which is a YouTube channel mostly, and blogs and stuff
Uh-huh,
like that.
uh-huh.
But loving the whole Avatar and was very interested in the whole language thing even prior to this.
Fantastic. Right. Anybody else? Yeah.
We're here with Attraction Magazine. I have been a pass holder for years and then just went to college and now working here at Walt Disney World. And I've seen the construction of Pandora since its beginning when it was just dirt all the way to what it was now. And I
Oh,
was
wow.
there on opening day and everything about this land is just absolutely blown my mind. It's just way beyond what I even dreamed.
Yeah, well, you're not the only one who's blown away. Let me tell you. Absolutely. Anybody else? Yeah.
I work for a blog InsideTheMagic.net.
Okay.
We do have like a YouTube channel and also a
great.
website as well. And we essentially
Fantastic.
cover mostly Disney and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm a lover of the theme parks as well.
Yeah,
Grew up in Orlando, coming all the
Excellent.
time.
Well, I've been having a ball. We were hoping to be able to be here for the opening in May, but there were things that prevented us from coming. But it's great to be here. I'm actually here for two reasons this time around. One is to meet with you folks and to meet with the cast members. The other is that there's an annual Avatar meetup that takes place every year. And this is the 7th annual meetup. And my husband John and I have attended all of them. It was Seattle, Virginia, Los Angeles, Colorado, Pittsburgh, and then this year it's here in Central Florida. Of course, the reason that we're here this year is that people who attend can see the theme park, which they've been so eager to see. We have a very dedicated group of fans, some of whom come every year. This time around, we had a guy fly in from Germany, a fellow from Sweden, another guy from the UK. So we have, I'm not going to tell you we have tens of thousands of people, but we have a very dedicated, hardcore group, some of whom have learned the language to the point that they're actually using it for real communication all the time. I mean, I get emails written to me in the language absolutely all the time.
That's great.
And completely, we have, and by the way, this is not false modesty, but there are people who speak and use the language better than I do. They've actually learned it to the point where they've really made it their own, and they've adopted it. We have people writing poetry, we have people writing short stories, we have people writing movie reviews. I mean, it's really quite it's one of the most thrilling things about the whole enterprise to me. To tell you a little bit about my background, I'm a linguist. I have a PhD in linguistics. For some strange reason, I found myself, and actually it's a wonderful position, I found myself teaching not in a linguistics department, but in a business school. I was a professor at the Marshall School of Business at USC, retired 7 years ago. So now I'm an emeritus professor, which is really good. It gives me a gold card, which allows me to park on campus free for the rest of my life. It's a very big deal. And it was back in 2005 that someone sent me an email saying, I think this might interest you. It was a friend of mine, Ed Finnegan, of the linguistics department at USC. I had done my graduate work in that department, but at this point I was totally divorced from that in the business school, so I would never have seen this email if it hadn't been forwarded to me. And Ed said, this sounds like you. I think you might be interested. And it turned out to be a solicitation from James Cameron's production company asking for a linguist who could develop a language for a science fiction film. At that point, no one ever heard the name Avatar. It was Project 880. Okay. Anyway, I looked at it and said, this sounds great. I want this. And so I essentially applied for the job. I sent James Cameron a copy of the workbook that Ed and I had written together, a linguistics workbook. sent an enthusiastic letter. I soon got a message, hey, why don't you come and meet with Jim? So I had this incredible 90 minutes, one-on-one, with James Cameron. It went well. At the end, we stood up, shook hands, and he said, welcome aboard. And my life has not been the same ever since. So it's been an amazing experience being involved in the language, seeing how a movie is constructed, meeting people I'd never thought I'd meet in my entire life. As you know, we are working on 4 sequels. Filming has begun. The expected debut dates are 2020, 2021, then a gap, then 2024, and then 2025. So with that, anybody have any questions?
Yes.
Sure.
Did you have this language at all, like already semi-created, or did you start from scratch based on information you received from Mr. Cameron?
Absolutely from scratch. Did not have anything created at all. In fact, I had never really created a language before.
Did you think of that? Like, was that something you thought about, creating your own, language? Was that a
Okay,
thing?
well, I mentioned this linguistics workbook that I had co-authored. It's called Looking at Languages. It's made for, it's an academic book. It's made for an introductory linguistics class. Linguistics, which as you know is a scientific study of language, it's a little bit like math in the sense that you're not going to learn it if you simply listen to a lecture. You've got to do it. And so typically, in linguistics classes, students, after they learn certain principles, are presented with problems. Here's some data in a language you've never seen before. Figure out what's going on. And so our workbook provided that kind of data. Now, the reason I'm mentioning all this is for 2 reasons. First, for one of the problems, I had created just little beginnings of a language for a specific purpose. The language was called Speak to Me. Okay. But the other thing is that for one of the subsequent editions of the book, I had put together an exercise for students in Klingon. Now, Klingon, as you know, is kind of the granddaddy of well-constructed, linguistically viable and legitimate languages for entertainment. Of course, there are Tolkien languages, which are amazing. But prior to that, you could kind of get away with gibberish, kind of the goo goo wow wow, and okay, that's an alien language. Well, after Klingon, that does not fly, and it has to be a language that actually stands up to scrutiny, that has grammar, that has phonology and morphology and syntax and semantics and all the things that go into a real language. And so that really was my only background in constructing language. Did I ever think that I would construct a language that anybody could actually speak? Never.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know a lot of languages borrow from each other, but in creating this entirely new language, did you have any basis, or what did you base it on to get the beginnings of the language?
Yeah. First of all, it's not based on any Earth language, contrary to what some people have said. Okay. Now, I didn't start from absolute scratch because James Cameron had come up with about 30 words on his own. These were mainly character names, Neytiri, Moat, for example, names of places, names of a few animals. So I took a look at that list, and again, it was just words, it wasn't any grammar or anything, and I kind of looked at what the sounds in that list were. And it reminded me a little bit of a Polynesian language. I think it may have had something possibly to do with the fact that that Jim had recently come back from New Zealand and maybe have had some Maori in his ears. So I kind of, one thing I knew was that I had to incorporate that little bit of vocabulary into the language. And so I created a sound system, phonetics and phonology, that would incorporate those words, but also be expanded and incorporate a lot of other stuff. So that was kind of a central core of the thing. once you think of the sound system, then you have to think of the morphology, how the words are built up, and then finally how the words are put together in sentences and phrases. There was another part of your question, I'm sorry, that I'm forgetting about.
Well, I just wanted to know, I mean, how did you, I mean, you said that you based this on what Cameron, the words that Cameron had gave you, but how did you come up with like the full?
Yeah, with the full vocabulary. I mean, most of it is just, okay, here's a sound system. The first thing you have to do is decide and have a very clear picture in your mind of what the sounds are in the language. And just as importantly, what the sounds are not. Because every language, whether human or alien, draws on a certain set of possible sounds. So for example, all human languages draw on the set of sounds that human beings can make. Kind of makes sense. But the particular sounds that a particular language will use varies from language to language. There are some sounds that are almost universal. I mean, every single language I've ever heard of has an M sound. But not every language has a th sound or a or many other things. So you have to decide on what sounds are in the language, what sounds are not in the language. Navi has some interesting rules about that because it has some very familiar sounds, p, t, k. It has some unusual sounds from a Western perspective. It has these things called ejectives, the o and the and the a. But it also omits certain very familiar sounds. Navi does not have a B, a D, or a G. A G, it has an NG, but it doesn't have a G. So if you see a word with b, d, g, that's not Navi. Okay? It doesn't have a CH, it doesn't have ch, and some other things. So you decide, then you have to decide on what combinations of sounds are possible. Also what positions certain sounds can be in. One notorious thing about Navi is that it has this NG sound at the beginning of a word. So the word for you is nga, N-G-A. Now the NG sound is very familiar in English. We have it all over the word, sing, bring, hung, whatever. What we don't have is that same sound at the beginning of a word. If you speak Indonesian, if you speak Thai, if you speak Vietnamese, it's the most natural thing in the world. But for most Western speakers, it's a challenge. That's probably the most challenging thing that the actors had to deal with. Making the ng sound at the beginning of a word. Okay, so once you're very clear on the sound structure of the language, then you can begin to create vocabulary. Now, how did I create vocabulary? Mostly, let's make up a fun-sounding word for whatever, And that is maybe sort of the vaguest, cloudiest, sort of most artistic part.
Okay.
How do you decide what the word is going to be for woman or for people or for child or for tree or anything like that? Let's make it up. According to the rules. Make it up so that it's going to fit into sentences or that people will more or less be able to pronounce it. And whatever. There is no inherent connection between a word and what it represents.
Okay.
So, now, when it comes to continuing to expand the vocabulary, and by the way, this is an ongoing process. I'd love to tell you that the Navi language has 40,000 words. As native speakers of English, we all have a command of, it varies, a passive command of probably at least 40,000 words. Okay, if you look at a totally unabridged dictionary, I've heard estimates up to 500,000 words in English. I mean, it's amazing. Navi doesn't have anything close to that. So the language is continuing to expand. I have a blog in which I introduce new vocabulary on an ongoing basis. We have grammatical discussions and so on. So when a new word, when the need for a new word comes up, and let me digress for a moment, I think this is fairly unique because we are actually getting input from fans about what new vocabulary should be. It began with my soliciting requests from people who are using the language on an everyday basis. I say, look, let me know what words you need immediately, and we'll try to create them.
And now you realize that was a mistake.
I realized something interesting about it, and that is there are people who know the language so well that not only could they ask words, please give us a word for this, please give us a word for that, but they could say, hey, what about this word, what about that? They would actually come up with vocabulary themselves because they know the rules. So I said to myself, hey, wouldn't it be great if the fans could suggest a word and I would accept it, and then years later they would hear it on the screen and you would say, hey, that's my word, that's my word. So we now have a system where there's something called the LEP, the Lexical Expansion Project. There's a whole hierarchy, there's a rotating chair. I mean, I had nothing to do with this. The fans totally set up by themselves. And every so often, I get a document which contains suggestions for new vocabulary. Not just requests, but actually suggestions for new vocabulary. And I can do one of three things. I can say, I love it, this is fantastic, it's in the language. I can say, basically a good idea, I think we need to tweak it a little bit. Or I can say, I'd like to do this a different way. Everything is submitted to me totally anonymously so that I have no sense of who submitted, so that there's no sense of ownership and rejection if I don't like anything. But that's been working pretty well. Yeah, so that's kind of thing. I know this is a very long-winded answer to your question. Just one more thing. To come up with innovations in vocabulary, there are essentially three things you can do. One is make up a totally new word, okay? That's from scratch. Another is borrow from another language. Now, languages do this all the time. If two languages are in contact, and one language has a word for a concept which doesn't initially exist in the other language, but then they decide that they need to use it, very often a borrowing will take place. But the borrowing is always filtered through the borrowing language's phonology, which is to say you have to adapt it to what you can pronounce. So the Japanese word for football is futobaru. Okay, that is football filtered through Japanese phonology, futobaru. Okay. So Navi does the same thing in relatively rare cases. So the Navi don't have gunships, okay, but gunships exist in the movie, and it would make sense for the Navi to need a term for that after the sky people have landed, because they see gunships. Okay, so what's the Navi word for a gunship? What we simply did is take the English word gunship, filter it through the Navi pronunciation system, and it comes out kunsip. An even simpler example is book. Okay, the Navi is not a written language, and so like many languages on Earth, it's simply a spoken language, and communication exists. Spokenly, it's handed down orally. So they don't have a word for book, but they encountered books through Dr. Grace Augustine's classes. So what's the Navi word for book? It's book. Okay, there's no B in Navi. The closest letter is P. And so book in English becomes book in Navi. Okay. The third way is to take existing elements in the language and combine them in new ways. So these are like compounds. So the word for computer in Navi is eltu lefnga. Eltu means brain, lefnga means metallic. So a computer is a metallic brain. That sort of thing. Okay. Let's come in. Yeah.
So, I guess from the time you met with James Cameron and kind of discussed the project, and I guess from the time of filming, and I know you kind of said there is no official, like, set finish with the language.
Right.
But from where from meeting with James to the production of the film, how long did it take you to make this language?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had taken better notes when I was doing it. It was definitely a matter of months. I mean, I guess maybe between 3 and 6 months. I'm not sure exactly when. But what I developed for the film was the language that covered the needs of the film. Okay, it didn't necessarily go too far beyond that, and of course the the development of the vocabulary was guided by the needs for the film. So if someone was talking about running, I knew I needed a verb for run. If no one was talking about walking, I knew that I could hold off on creating a verb for walk. That could come later. So the actual development of the language, just in terms of what came before something else, was guided by the needs of the film.
Was there ever a word that you created that James didn't like the way it sounded on film and he had you change it to something else?
Boy, that's a good question. Not to my recollection. I do remember, though, very vividly that on set, one of the actors was not pleased with the way a certain word sounded. I remember what the word was. It was the word for go, and the actor said, "How am I going to say go with this one?" And I said, "Well, the word is cat." And the actor said, "Cat, terrible word, terrible. I don't want to." But that was a word, and eventually it was fine. Yeah. So I mean, people definitely had reactions to certain words, but on the whole, things went pretty well. And there were certain words, of course, that really caught on with the cast and crew. The best known example is the word for moron, which was part of the script, which I had to come up with. Anyone know it? Scown. It's spelled Skxawng. And that was a word that for some reason people really glommed onto and adopted. And crew members would turn to each other and say, you scown. So that was kind of fun. Yeah.
Where can you had mentioned about the annual Avatar meetup?
Yes.
Where can people find information on that for new enthusiasts who haven't already been a part of it?
AvatarMeet.com.
There we go.
Yeah.
Really interested in, did you need visuals or did you use visuals to come up with the language? Was there any available to you and did they help in your creation?
Visuals. Well, I mean, for words for the flora and fauna, it was important for me to have visuals and also descriptions of what they were, because there are certain plants that do certain things, certain plants that have sort of exploding seed structures. So for that, I would take the word for explode, because I had to kind of think, what would the Navi call this particular plant? What would they call this particular animal? Sometimes it would be just an entirely new word, but sometimes it would be a word that represented something about the plant. I mean, in English, we have daisy. I don't know if daisy means anything other than the name of the flower. But then we also have sunflower. And sunflower, I assume, reflects something about that. So, I mean, we have both of those things in Navi as well. So to that extent, visuals were important. For the grammatical stuff and for basic verbs, no. Yeah.
Since there is going to be so many more movies coming out, does everyone who lives on Pandora speak the same language, or are there different dialects of Navi?
It would be unusual for there not to be different dialects of Navi.
Okay.
Yeah, just as there are so many different dialects of English and so on. Yeah. Sure.
How many words did you actually create for the first movie, and then with the sequels coming out, how much has it expanded?
Yeah. I actually have an interesting story about this. As for how many words, I mean, I think the original vocabulary list for the first movie had maybe about 500 words. It soon expanded after that. John is smiling about something because we had kind of an interesting little experience. The movie came out at the end of 2009, and 2010 was an insane year. I mean, we were just traveling around. I was interviewed. I was on the cover of magazines and newspapers. It was really amazing. And we were invited. I was invited to speak in a number of different places. One of which was Stockholm, Sweden. There is a wonderful group called the Bonnier Group, a conglomerate of publishers and the things, and they have a retreat every year where they invite, I think, typically 14 speakers over the course of 2 days, and it was quite a wonderful experience. When I was invited in 2010, the theme was passion, and so we were all the speakers representing scientists and entrepreneurs and creative people, talking to speak about what kind of motivates it. So I was due to speak Monday morning, the first thing. And so we got there about 7 a.m. and we're sitting in the equivalent of the green room, I suppose. And then another speaker arrives who was the keynote speaker. I won't reveal who it was, but it was a fairly well-known personality that everybody would recognize. And this person came in with an entourage and sat down, and there wasn't too much communication between us, but then at some point, the person said, "So who are you and what are you doing?" So I said, "Well, I'm Paul Fromer. I created this language for the movie." "Oh, yeah, I heard about that. So how many words do you have?" So I said, "Well, at this point, we probably have about 1,200 words." And the response was, 1,200 words? My parrot knows 1,200 words. So I said to myself, okay, well, that's fine. But that was kind of an interesting reaction to it. Anyway. Yeah, but the vocabulary now has expanded considerably beyond that. And of course, as new needs arise, we had new vocabulary.
Did you create some words specifically for the theme park area?
Yeah. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was asked for, so for example, I was asked to create a word for fan in the sense of someone totally committed to, an incredible enthusiast. And so we had a word for a verb for to be enthusiastic about something, which is soha. And one who is enthusiastic would be a sohayu. And one who is extraordinarily enthusiastic is a ansohayu. So, so you folks would all count as ansohayu. I think, yeah. Sure.
So, I guess as you kind of said earlier, as like new movies come, you kind of get like asked to create more words. So do you essentially get to see like the script for the film and then kind of translate it, or is it? Oh, wow, that is what happens.
I get to see the scripts, and I get to see what is going to be in the language, and I essentially do a translation. Sometimes I will have all the vocabulary already, and sometimes I'll have to come up with some new vocabulary. And that's pretty much how it works.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I don't know how much cast member exposure you've had, but are there words or phrases that are easy or hard for them, or maybe just apply actors to that? Or
Yeah. Well, there definitely are things that are easy, and well, let's put it this way: there are things that are harder than others. Okay, and the cast members are doing a really good job. And we had a really great session just before you folks arrived, where we went over some stuff. And by the way, we can talk about some of the words as well. The word for hello is notoriously difficult. It's kante, which is kind of tricky. That a lot easier. Thank you is irayo, and by the way, that's a James Cameron word. That was one of the original words that he had come up with, and so that is not that's fairly accessible, I think. The things that are hard, typically about the language, and really about any language that you're studying, whatever is not in your language is going to be a little more challenging than stuff that's very familiar to you. So, for example, as we mentioned, the ng sound, putting that in the beginning of a word is a challenge. These ejectives, which are probably the most quote-unquote famous part of the language, or unusual part of the language that people have been talking about, which I've notated as PX, TX, and KX. These are sort of popping consonants that sound like ah, ooh, and eh. And if you listen carefully to the dialogue in the movie, you'll hear some of these. They're called ejectives. They're perfectly legitimate sounds that are found in a lot of human languages. They're found in Native American languages. They're found in parts of Africa. They're found in parts of Asia and so on. They're unusual to most speakers of Western languages. And so that is a bit of a challenge. How do you say, oh? Well, the way I've been explaining it, and in fact, I actually found this explanation online a long time ago. It'll be spelled TXU, ooh. So in order to pronounce it accurately, the first step is to make a T sound as loudly as you can without breathing. So it'll be, okay? And then you add the vowel. So it's ooh, ooh. And then as you practice it, you shorten the gap between the consonant and the vowel. So you begin with ooh, and then shorten it, ooh, ooh, and eventually ooh. And so that's what most people have done to make it successful.
So how do you help people learn to say hello? How do
Okay.
you break it down?
Well, so it's two syllables. Kyle is easy enough. Kyle, K-A-L, Kyle, and that's the very first thing on the list. So the TXI, two parts of it. There's a consonant and there's a vowel. The vowel part is perfectly familiar in English. It's I. It's a vowel in sit, big, pick, whatever. Perfectly. What's tricky about it is that vowel in English does not occur at the end of a word. It's always followed by a consonant. But in Navi, it can occur at the end of a word. So it's I, which is not hard. And the TX, I, and then eventually I, and eventually I. And then you put it together, got it.
It's saying tick, but without the CK.
Yeah, right.
Hard.
Okay, exactly. So I've been doing this for 10 years now, and so it's become fairly natural to me. In the beginning, it wasn't easy for me either. But it is something that you can practice, and it's something you can work on. And people do it, and people get a lot better. Yeah.
This is your voice on the translator.
Yes.
That's what I was thinking. Which is really funny, gonna make you laugh, because there was one word I was like, this guy doesn't say it right.
Uh-oh.
But now I know, obviously, they were wrong and you are correct.
Which word is it?
I don't remember. It was something that I definitely heard in the theme park.
Okay.
And I remember when I got the
Okay.
translator home, I was like, wow, they really messed that up on the translator.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's possible.
No,
I
don't think so.
Okay.
I think you're right, and I'm hearing it wrong from one
Okay.
or two people.
It's very possible.
That's an awesome thing.
Okay. Are there any particular phrases that you'd like to practice on here? As you see, it's kind of divided up into.
Talk about the number system. The octal number.
Oh yeah. Okay. So this is on the second page. As I may have mentioned, one of the things that I noticed when I was looking at the prototypes of the Navi is that they have 4 digits on each hand rather than 5. And it occurred to me that that would imply that their counting system would be based on 8 rather than 10. And so I asked James Cameron about it, and he said, absolutely. So the Navi counting system is octal rather than decimal. In other words, it's based on groups of 8s rather than groups of 10s. So the way you count is 1 to 8 is au, more, e, sing, mr, pokap, kine, vol. 9 is 8 and 1, volau. 10 is 8 and 2, vomun. That kind of thing. So everything is based on 8. What I've given there is the ordinary decimal number, and then how it would be written in octal. So in octal, the number 8 would be written 10, because the placeholders are not 1, 10, 100, but 1, 8, 64, right? And what's 64 times 8? whatever. Okay, whatever. Yeah. Okay, so the word for Pandora, which you see in the middle of the bottom list, is Ewa Eveng. Ewa Eveng. That's a compound. It actually means child of Ewa. So Eveng is the word for child, and Ewa is Ewa. There are two forms here. Ewa Eveng is the proper dictionary form. Eweveng is a short form which is colloquial and perfectly acceptable. So to say welcome to Pandora, it's Zolau Neperte Ewevengne.
Do you have, and this could be like a simple question, but do
Alright.
you have like a translation for like Walt Disney World or like?
I don't. I mean, Walt Disney World. That'd be a good example of putting an English phrase into Navi. Walt Disney World. I mean, what would Walt Disney be filtered through the Navi sound system? So a Navi word could not end in LT. So you'd have to add a vowel there. It'd probably be, and the vowel aw doesn't exist in Navi. It would be the A or O. If it were A, it'd be Walte, would be Walt. And Disney would come out Tizni. So it would be something like Walte Tizni. Yeah.
Sounds good. Is there a word for world already?
Kifke.
Kifke.
Kifke,
Okay.
yeah.
That sounds actually really cool.
And so it'd be Walte Tizni Kifke. That'd be like the world of Walt Disney.
I like that.
Could I get an unofficial spelling?
Yeah. Let me give it to you at the end.
Okay, that's
I'll
fine.
be happy to.
No,
Yeah.
okay.
And it'll also give me a chance to think about it a little more.
Okay. Of course.
because the problem is that everything I say becomes canon. You know? Okay.
What did you say your blog was that deals with the evolution of the language?
Yeah, it's Naviteri. It's Naviteri, which means about Navi. So it's naviteri.org, and there it is. Yeah.
Sometimes languages evolve over time, and
Yes.
the land here is set 100 years later than the
Right.
first movie. So was any of that dealt with the language?
Yeah. In terms of evolution over 100 years, I don't know if we have anything like that. However, if you want to do a good job constructing a language, you have to think historically, and you have to think over time. So in other words, you have to think about how a word, especially a compound word, would have developed over time. So a good example would be the two words I've given you for Pandora. I mean, Ewa Eveng might have been the original term. But then you think, okay, people are going to be speaking this colloquially over a period of time. How will the word change, typically? Because people, whether on Earth or Pandora, are lazy. But lazy sounds pejorative, and I don't mean it that way. I mean, maybe a better word is efficient. They want to use the least energy to communicate. And so Ewa Eveng would very likely, probably the first step would be that the glottal stop would be weakened. Ewa Eveng. So you think of kind of stages. Ewa Eveng is the original. As you speak, the glottal stop probably would become weaker, Ewa Eveng, and then Ewa Eveng would evolve to Eweveng. So that's a kind of thinking that you really have to do over time. How would things that were originally this way, over the course of maybe thousands of years, evolve into what we have today?
And that's the kind of thinking you did to create the language that was in the movie.
Yeah.
But you had to figure this started thousands of years ago.
Yes, exactly. Right.
We probably have a couple more minutes. Anybody has your last question?
Or anybody wanna try some? How about I see you, which is kind of nice. So that's like the number 2 phrase on that. So it's well ngati kameye. So the way this breaks down is well is a form of the word I. Ngati is a form of the word you. And kameye is a form of the word to see. I've capitalized the S and C because it's the kind of see that it's not the physical see, but it's the spiritual see. I see into you, I relate to you, I understand you, I accept you, the kind of thing. So it's well ngati kamea. Let's kind of try it. So the first word is well.
Well.
Okay. Now the second word you in the object form is ngati.
Ngati.
Yeah. And what you have to do is you have to feel the ng kind of in your throat. Ngati. Ngati. So it's well ngati. Okay. Okay. The third word. By the way, let me point something out here. I've underlined certain parts of words. Okay, this is important because that indicates a part of the word that's stressed. Stress in Navi is unpredictable. So if you don't know the language and you just see that word, you might think it's kameye. But it's not, it's kameye. So that's where the stress goes. So it's well ngati kameye. Try it. Well ngati kameye. I see. By the way, as you notice, there are different ways to say the thing depending on who you're talking to. So if talking, Navi doesn't just have a singular and plural. It has a singular, a dual, a trio, and a plural. Plural is 4 or more. So to say I see you to one person is well ngati kami, 2 people, well mengati, 3 people, well engati, and to 4 or more people, well angati.
Why make it that complicated?
Why not? But I wanted to do interesting stuff with the language, but not outlandish stuff. So I think virtually everything in the language will have some counterpart to an existing language on Earth. So as people have noted, there are little parts of the language that work a little bit the way Hebrew works. A little part that work the way Persian works. Little parts of the language work the way Chinese works, and so on. That's not a coincidence because I think typically, at least I think for many language creators, including myself, the things that are most readily accessible to you are things in the language in which you've studied. So I've studied some Hebrew. I lived in Iran for years, so I spoke Persian pretty well at one point. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Malaysia, teaching math in the Malay language. So I knew a fair amount of Malay, studied Chinese for about a year and a half. I can say very little. I once learned about 300 characters, which is probably what the average 6-year-old knows. But those kinds of things are to a certain extent reflected in the language. But the combination is unique. There is no language that has all of these properties. And things to a much greater degree than is found in some other language. So for example, all the verbal morphology, the conjugations, tenses, aspect, things like that, everything is done in Navi, not by using prefixes, which is taking a root and putting something in front, not by using suffixes, but by using infixes. So in Navi, to change verbs from present to past or from continuing to completed, you stick something in the middle of the verb. So the verb for hunt, say, is taron, T-A-R-O-N, that's the root. To say that hunting has been completed, it's tolaron. So you take the O-L, put it in the middle. To say that you may hunt is tivaron. To say you will hunt is tayaron. To say I have hunted it and I'm happy about it is tolareon. So do some Earth languages do this? Yes, but not to the extent that Navi does it. So that's some of the innovation that went into it.
How are you pronouncing good day?
Trlefpo. Yeah, so the double R is a very strong trill and you can have fun with it. So, ter lefboom. Ter means day. Lefboom is an adjective meaning enjoyable.
I really wanted to see if you were gonna roll the R like I thought, so.
Ter lefboom. Yeah, that's fun. Anything else?
It's not an Eartha Kitt influence.
Was that?
It's not an Eartha Kitt influence.
You know, I never thought of that, but I bet she'd be very good at
She'd
Navi.
be very
She'd be
good.
fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Not being dead.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you all for coming.